I see we have some folks starting to trickle in. I wanted to say good morning to all of you that have joined us thus far. Wanted to wish you a happy coffee day so far. If you haven't already indulged in your first cup of coffee, feel free to join us and catch up. We'll get started in about 2 minutes. I see Wendy says her coffee is almost gone. I'm just getting started.
And as you're joining us, this is Rebecca. I'm just popping in to remind you to go ahead and update the name that shows up on your video screen. Um, Feel free to show your video if you'd like. We'd love to see your faces. It's if you hover over your picture, it's the three dots in the top right of your video screen that shows your lovely face, and you'll go ahead and click on that and go ahead and change your name there. Thanks for being here. We'll get started soon.
Well, hello again, everyone. My name is Salima Thomas with the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. We're so glad to have everyone here on today. We are halfway through our institute. So, thank you for all of you who have been a part of the experience thus far. I hope you've been able to enjoy not only the learning that we're experiencing, but the fellowship and the connection with other nonprofit leaders across the state. So, I, we are in for strategic planning, and we're going to learn about all the steps on how to go through that. But before we do, wanted to remind you of a few kind of housekeeping things we have. The Zoom features, please feel free at any time to raise your hand to be recognized. This group is doing a really great job with utilizing the chat feature. Please continue to go ahead and do that. If you have comments or feedback or questions, my colleagues and I will try to do a really great job of keeping an eye on that if you have any inquiries. So before we begin, I wanted to also wish you a happy coffee day. If you're a coffee drinker like me, I've already welcomed those. Yes, I see Lisa just held up her cup, and any others, feel free to indulge on today. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with the. If we could just accelerate forward on the slides. Again, wanted to welcome you all on behalf of the Center for Nonprofits. We do have our president and CEO, Jean Tedrow, that's joining us again today, and we'll offer some closing remarks before we conclude. I also wanted to introduce one of the center's partners from High Point University, Dr. David Bergen. He's the chair and the professor of human relations in the Bernard Family Leadership Lecture Series. High Point University is such an integral part of the birth and the ongoing um, institute, which was birthed in Guilford through the Guilford Nonprofit Consortium. So I wanted to offer Dr. Bergen an opportunity just to share a few remarks about High Point University's leadership lecture series, as well as your ongoing participation in the Institute and with partnering with the Center for Nonprofits. So Dr. Bergen, I don't think we can hear you. Not yet. No, we're having trouble. Well, we're going to figure out what's going on there, but I definitely wanted to hear your remarks, and thank you for waving to all of us and welcoming us. I'm sure once we get everything squared away with the sound, we'll get you patched in here in just a moment. So we apologize for the difficulties, but wanted to thank High Point University for their ongoing partnership, not only with the center, but also with our regional partners all across the state, and bringing nonprofit management training and educational opportunities to emerging leaders and seasoned leaders within the field and the sector. So, as I mentioned before, we are going to learn about strategic planning today. And you might have noticed Dr. Palmer has a different background because she's joining us from High Point University on today. And again, that was going to be our segue to share about a little bit more about this partnership. So again, we thank High Point University for affording the space in which Dr. Palmer is participating on today. Again, ongoing partnership with the Guilford Nonprofit Consortium and the Triangle Community Foundation that has made this institute an inaugural success, and for all of the participants that are here on today. We thank you all for joining us and being a part of this cohort. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Palmer to get us started, and we're looking forward to an amazing day. Dr. Palmer, here's the agenda.
Can everyone hear me? Great. Good morning, everyone. Dr. Bergen, if you hang on with us, maybe we can get to hear your voice in the next few minutes. I know you do have class to go to. I see you've got your AirPods in. I don't know if that might be it, maybe some connection there. But as long as we can see, oh, you took them out. Okay. All right, so today our topic is strategic planning, and we have several touch points that we're going to focus on. Let me also say, get geared up for quite a bit of transition today. So we will be using your handouts. There will be documents that you will use whereby we will put links in the chat. We will have about 3 breakout sessions just to kind of give you a sense of how all of what we're doing is going to unfold. Our touch points as it relates to the strategic planning process is pretty typical for any strategic planning process. And so we will dive in deep with each of those. We will do an introduction. We're also going to do a review and reflection of last session. There were some questions that some of you had towards the end, and so we're going to focus on that at the beginning, and then we'll move right into the closing. So again, somewhat of the same structure. As Salima mentioned, I am at a different location. So I am at High Point University, and so hopefully there might be 1 or 2 other backgrounds that you get to see. I am in one of the study rooms here on the HPU campus, and so let's get started. If we could go to the next slide. So for our introduction today, we are going to focus on where you are located in terms of what city you're in. So we're going to go into breakouts, and you're going to share with your participants what city you're in, but you're also going to share the mission of your organization. So get ready, the mission of your organization. I don't know if you need to pull that up on your website. I don't know if it's on the back of a business card. Not sure where you might have that tucked away. But when you go in your breakouts, that's what you will do in terms of your introduction today.
Great, thanks, Dr. Palmer. I'm going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms. We'll give you about, how many minutes would you like, Dr. Palmer?
Let's do about 5 to 7 minutes.
Okay, great.
Okay,
All right,
thank
we'll
you.
open up the rooms and I'll broadcast the message for what we're asking you all to discuss to each of the groups. So we'll see you back here in about 7 minutes.
Thank you.
Hello to those of you who just joined us. I'm going to go ahead and assign you to a breakout room. We're discussing the city that your nonprofit is located in and what your nonprofit is known for or its mission. And so I'll go ahead and assign you to those groups right now.
I think everyone is starting to trickle back. It's always good to learn about the diversity of geography and the different cities that people are from all across the state and the different roles that are represented from several organizations and subsectors. So thank you for your time and sharing within your breakout groups.
Are we all back in, Rebecca? Am I up or we're still waiting?
Yeah, we've got
Okay, all right.
Yep.
Awesome. So what we would like for you to do is to use the chat, and if we could first begin with what cities you're located in, and we're going to leave the map up, you know, that shows the 100 counties. But if you could just kind of give us a general idea if you're what city you're in, and just kind of put that in the chat. So that would be, are you in the eastern part, western part, or northern or southern part of the state? So east, west, north, south. Okay, I can see Greensboro, High Point, Raleigh, Charlotte, Silva, state of Mecklenburg, okay. Elizabeth City, okay. Fayetteville. Again, I see a few more High Points. Awesome. So we are representing all four, I guess, kind of regions of the state. The next thing we would like for you to do is to share your mission. So if we could go to the gallery view and just kind of have 2 or 3 people just kind of give us the name of your nonprofit and share your mission with us. And it's okay if you read your mission statement. It's okay if you do that. So just kind of let Rebecca know kind of who wants to be unmuted. I think she's in charge of the audio. Okay. So
I'll share.
tell us your name and yeah.
Kathy,
Okay.
My name is Kathy Zaitis. I'm with YWCA in High Point, North Carolina. And I was sharing with our breakout group, we're celebrating our 100-year anniversary this year. We were established in 1920. And the YWCA's mission is dedicated to eliminating racism, promoting peace, empowering women, promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. That's our mission.
Awesome. Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody want to share next?
Can I go? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. All right. So the mission of DUP is to provide comprehensive wraparound services for children, adults, and families by promoting health, education, and life readiness with the ultimate goal of maximizing their individual life experiences and increasing the economic self-sufficiency of families.
Thank you. So another High Point. Can we get another region of the state? And of course, I'm in High Point today too, so.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi. My name is Emma Santana de Andrea. I live in Mint Hill, North Carolina, Charlotte, and I am the founder of Casa Tia Emma. It means the house of Aunt Emma. I serve the community in Mint Hill, and I work with 12 years old and all the way to 18 young girls that are after school program, and we try to help them to become leader in their community and develop their skills to be successful in whatever it is they want to become successful. And we help them with all their activities for getting their resources to graduate from high school.
Okay. All right. One more. Can we get one more? Thank you. It's Emma, right? And not Emma. It's
Emma.
Emma. Okay. Thank you. And I can see Mosaic Development Group. They've got their mission. Thank you, Lisa. And Corey has put the Center for Visual Artists, their mission in the chat. Keep your mission statement handy because it will come. We will use that later in the session. So, and also if you have a vision statement, that's going to come in handy as well. So if you have access to that, that'll come in handy. And we see Jen K. I see Balsam Mountain Trust and North Carolina Urban Forest Council, Food Bank of the Albemarle. So we've got quite a bit of subsectors, if you will, as it relates to what we do and the missions that we are all trying to maintain day in and day out in our various roles. I also want to share with you the nonprofit that I helped start and that I serve as the executive director of. Are there any executive directors at the present time or even before today where you served as the executive director as a volunteer? As a volunteer, are there any executive directors where you served in that you served as an executive director as a volunteer, as opposed to being a paid executive director? Any volunteer executive directors? You can put that in the chat. I see Leslie with the thumbs. Okay. Anybody else? Executive director as a volunteer. Okay. So there's some of us who have started nonprofits and the initial or the first executive director was the founder. And in doing so, you spend some time giving to that nonprofit without being compensated. The nonprofit I helped start, we started in 2009. And I have been volunteering as the executive director since we started it. And so I wanted to share our mission with you as you have shared your mission with us. And we are located in Jamestown, North Carolina, which is a township between Greensboro and High Point. And I'm gonna have Leslie go to the PowerPoint. Well, there you go. Thank you. You got it. So here is our mission. We are the Guilford County Resource and Referral Center. As you can see, our mission is working with individuals, families, and communities. The idea is for us to be a resource and referral entity that links children and families to services and resources. And of course, the vision aligns with that as well. One of the primary services that we provide, we are endorsed as a Medicaid provider, and we provide outpatient therapy. And we are probably what you might consider like a quarter-time operating nonprofit. So we are not, we don't work 8 hours a day, and we do work sometimes 7 days a week, but our hours are flex hours. We do see mostly school-age children. And again, like I said, we've been around for about 10 years. Any questions about our organization? And we can go back to gallery view now. Thank you. Any questions about how many executive directors do we have in the class? If you could just use use your reaction, your thumbs up reaction. I think that's easier to see. Okay, so Janetta and Latoya and Emma and Jackie, Corey. Okay, so we've got, okay, Shauna. So we've got quite a few executive directors in our class. Again, thank you so much for sharing. We are, again, focusing on strategic planning today. If we could go to the PowerPoint. So we've had a little bit of a journey already, in that we have focused on board governance. We've focused on program design, management, and evaluation last week. Prior to that, as we all know, we focused on the principles and practices guide. We're going to refer to that again today. We also engaged in a capacity assessment, and some of you have given us feedback on the usefulness of that. What we thought we would do today is just do a little bit of review and reflection. Some of you had questions about board recruitment, and so I wanted to kind of speak about that. the role of the executive director. We're going to refer back to one of our handouts from last week. So Leslie, if you could cue up the comparison of the role of the executive director and the board chair. I do believe that was the handout that we had in the packet. So I want to refer to that. And we also wanted to turn our attention to the equity, diversity, and inclusion principle that is in our principles and practices guide. Take a quick glance at the components of a program, and then take any questions that you might have related to all that we've covered so far. So starting with board recruitment, one of the things that we talked about last week was the composition of the board and identifying those skills that board members need. We also talked about board orientation, onboarding board members, ensuring that they understand the bylaws. We talked about that, reviewing the bylaws and going over the bylaws with them. We also focused on demographics and characteristics of individuals that we want to serve on our boards, and looking at the fact that based on what we need, and of course today we talked about mission already, in terms of what the mission of your nonprofit is, and the type of individuals that you are in need of serving on your board. If we could go to the executive director handout and the board chair handout. And we can do either one. It could be the chair of the board. Yeah. So we talked about this last week, but there was a question in the chat at the end of just kind of talking about that role and the difference in the two. One of the things that happens in the kind of day-to-day operations of a nonprofit is sometimes we might have a board chair that confuses their role. They may not necessarily understand that their role is not necessarily managing the day-to-day operations, but it is helping the executive director interact with the board and being the liaison between the board and the executive director. Keeping in mind that the executive director is the most, I think, the most significant resource of a board, because the executive director is in the know of what is occurring in that nonprofit on a day-to-day basis. And so they are, my opinion, they are the most reliable resource for that nonprofit. And so what we want to do is we want to work really hard to make sure that the relationship between the board chair and the executive director is a healthy one, so that the organization can continue to move forward during the tenure of that board chair, because board chairs typically transition out after a certain amount of time. There is a question, how do these roles change where an organization has an interim ED or a CEO? Even if the executive director is in an interim posture or is serving in an interim role, they are still the executive director. Interim just means that they're there temporarily, but the day-to-day operations must go on. So they are still supposed to manage the day-to-day operations. Now, they may lean more on the board of directors as an interim, because there are some things they may not necessarily understand. I would encourage any nonprofit that if you're going to secure an interim ED or CEO, try to select and identify someone who knows what your organization is about and has some sense of how your organization functions. Because you don't want the fact that that person is there temporarily. You don't want that to slow down momentum. You don't want morale of staff to decrease. You want everything to continue as normal as possible. But there are going to be some elements of that might be a little bumpy because it is an interim person. But that person should just transition into what that executive director does. I liken it to having a substitute teacher. You know, that individual is coming in and they're picking up the game plan, or should I say strategic plan. Hopefully there's one in place. They're picking up that plan and they're carrying it out, filling that role. So I hope that helps. Any other questions about the executive director's responsibility? So if you could, in your principles and practices guide, if you could, I think it's page 9. So you would have received that the very first session. One of the things that I did want to highlight, and I don't know if we can show it on the screen. We don't have to, Leslie. I do believe everybody has a copy. Does everybody have a copy?
I can go ahead and put that into the chat, the PDF.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Perfect.
Sure thing.
So if you refer to page 9, this is the equity, diversity, and inclusion is one of the principles of our capacity building framework. And if you notice, we mentioned quite a bit about the board and EDI in the build frame, right? So early on, we want to make sure that our board of directors, in terms of characteristics, that the board is balanced, balanced in the context of what your mission and vision is. So we don't want to yield to equity, diversity, and inclusion just to check it off our list, right? We want to be very intentional about this particular principle and how we incorporate these practices in how your board is structured and the composition of your board. So if you look under build, the first 2 practices are related to engaging the board in elements of equity, diversity, and inclusion, again, that align with the direction of your nonprofit organization. It should be authentic, it should be, again, in alignment with the essence of what your nonprofit is all about. I think it's problematic when we try to force diversity and it really doesn't fit. People recognize that and they feel that when you're forcing it. So you want to make sure that the decisions that you're making related to that in the context of board governance and recruitment of board members, please make sure that it is a authentic ask and that you are inquiring with individuals who might align with what your intentions are of who you want to serve on your board. Any comments about that? Or any questions about that? But I just wanted us to be reminded that that is one of our principles.
How do we balance recruiting our constituents or recruiting the people that we serve with also wanting to have a real working board when many of our constituents have to work full time? They may not have the time, money, connections like we talked about that we can ask as much of them reasonably as we could retirees or people who work part-time or other more traditional, what we think of as board members.
I think it is my response is very practical. It is, you have to connect with your recruit and be intentional about why you're asking them to serve. And sometimes that means you might have some vacant slots for a while because you can't find a person that fits that element of the composition of your board. So don't panic about that, right? I mean, it's okay to have vacant slots. I would prefer that you have a vacant slot than you have a person that's really not able to serve in the way in which you need them to. And another thing I would say, Jen, is once a board member tells you they don't have time, they don't have time, you know, or once a board member decides they want to resign, let them resign. You know, what we'll oftentimes try to do is to hold on to them because they're a warm body, right? But don't do that, you know. I know in your bylaws, it notes what your minimum number of board members are. That is, and that's your guide. But it doesn't necessarily mean that day in and day out, you're gonna have all of those slots filled. And you're not breaking any law if you don't have all those slots filled. You want to work diligently to secure board members that can really serve. So my practical answer to your question is, let's say you have 10 board members that you need, let's just say, and you're able to identify 6 that just meet your needs and they're all in and everything is going well, but there are 4 slots that you just can't fill because you can't identify anyone to meet those needs. Then that just may be the way that it is for a while. You know, I think sometimes we rush to make sure we have the numbers because that's what's written in our bylaws. But that is not necessarily a negative, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're violating any kind of major law. I say it that way because I've interacted with executive directors who just panic because, oh, I've got 2 slots and they're vacant and I need, well, you want the right people. You want the right people. And yes, times are changing. You know, we used to see where there were quite a few individuals who serve on boards who might be maybe retired, et cetera. Well, we have a lot of young folks who, if we help them build their capacity, they could be some awesome board members. So you might want to think about how to incorporate in your recruitment strategy. Let's say you identify someone, never served on a board, don't know a lot about nonprofits, but they want to help your organization. Let them help you the way that they can. And that can get tricky too, because that's a lot to manage. You know, you're already managing your staff, and now you've got to manage board members that might need some help, you know, with building their capacity. So my answer is very practical. I mean, sometimes you just might have some vacancies, but I would say err on the side of having a vacant slot as opposed to having someone who really isn't in a position to serve you well.
Thank you.
Does that help? Any other questions about board recruitment, executive director role? I know my time is ticking away here and I want to get into our topic today, but I did want to spend a little time just kind of reflecting a little bit. Let's see, the next item was the program design, management, and evaluation. We gave you a list and we did a little bit of work with that. Are there any questions about those components of setting up a program? What we tried to do is to give you a guide. And one thing that I noticed that wasn't on our list was budget under management. So please add budget. I noticed that that wasn't there, but we need to include that. Can we move on to?
Dr. Palmer?
Yes.
Oh, I put a raised hand in the, I didn't know if that's what we were, or if we should just unmute and say something.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Just
I did.
Yes, yeah.
I
didn't see that.
That's okay. I didn't want to be rude and jump in, but I thought it was really interesting in the prior question around recruitment and board and just in looking at equity, that, you know, one of the things that was mentioned last time when we were talking about board and reviewing policies and procedures and the bylaws in particular, is that every once in a while it's good to go back and look at those and do a review of them. And so I think when, especially if your organization has maybe made a renewed commitment to equity, and this is kind of a new process, which I think for existing organizations, maybe that have been around for 20 or 30 years, this might be a new renewed commitment that folks might have made. especially with the current climate. And so as people are trying to maybe transition to a more equitable approach to their board, and look and get some more diversity, it can be kind of problematic to try to attain the diversity and then not change their policies and procedures and practices so that the diversity is accommodated. And I think one of the things that can be really important is to go back first and take a lens, an equity lens, and look at the bylaws and how that board is formed and created. And, you know, is it a comfortable space for a diverse group of people to gather? You know, we always say bring diversity to the table. Well, like, is that table even necessary? You know, like, I mean, it depends on your organization, of course, but I think it's really important point to say, start with your bylaws, because you can bring all kinds of voices to the table, but if they don't feel like they can speak, and if you haven't created a space that that inclusion is encouraged, then it doesn't matter how many voices are there, they're going to leave because their voice isn't valued. So I'd say start there first if you really and truly have a commitment to equity.
Thank you, Adriana, right? Did I pronounce that right? Yes. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. It needs to be genuine and authentic, you know, not this kind of, we're just checking this off our list and saying that, you know, we're yielding to, or we're considering or incorporating equity, diversity, and inclusion practices. Bylaws are a great place to start. And I would add to that, as I mentioned before, let's review those bylaws, because oftentimes we don't, and they're there and they guide us, but we don't review them as much as we should, and we don't amend them as much as we should. You know, an annual review, as Adriana shared, is a good idea, to just kind of make sure that you're headed in the right direction with EDI. So thank you very, very much. So capacity assessment, we've already covered that. And now we're going to move into our topic for today. So the very first item in your handouts is the definition. And we are going to focus on startup first. So we're going to look at the strategic planning definition. We're going to do a exercise around truth and myth about strategic planning. We're going to talk a little bit about the process, setting up a strategic planning committee, and also we're going to talk about your choices that you have when engaged in strategic planning, or when you're getting geared up, I should say, for strategic planning. So we're going to take a look at the strategic planning definition. And like I said, that should be in your handout. And Leslie, if you could go to that on the screen for me. I think you might be able to get to it a little quicker than it seems that I am right now. So here is our definition of strategic planning. So it is a way in which we produce fundamental decisions and actions that shape and guide what our organization or our nonprofit is, what it does, and why it does it. So it is action oriented. It is a process, and it is in some ways it is a disciplined effort, because we have guidelines and we have parameters that we are operating in, and kind of going back to those touch points. That disciplined effort are those touch points, and so we're going to walk through each of these. And do some work around just kind of understanding how each of these work. So in your packet, you have a handout titled Truth and Myth. It's a worksheet. Can you go to the next page, Leslie? Thank you. So what I want you to do is I want you to spend some time answering, take about 3 minutes to answer these. So is the item a truth or is it a myth as it relates to strategic planning? So I'm going to give you just a couple minutes to do that. And we're going to use the chat for you to respond. We're going to use the chat. So you'll type in a T if you think that item is true, and you'll type in a M if you think that item is a myth. So we'll take about 60 more seconds, 1 more minute. Okay, let's kind of work through what we think the answers to these are. Give me 1 second to kind of get. Okay. So strategic planning is systematic in that it calls for following a process that is both structured and data-based. If you would put in the chat, what do you think? That is truth. So you can give yourself a hand clap if you got that right. The next one is strategic planning is a substitute for the exercise of judgment by leadership. Truth or myth? Strategic planning is a substitute for the exercise of judgment by leadership. What do you think? Truth or myth? Okay, that is a myth. You can give yourself a hand clap if you put myth. And you can use your reaction feature there. Number 3, strategic planning is a smooth, predictable, linear process. Strategic planning is a smooth, predictable, linear process. Is that truth or myth? Truth or myth? And if you would just, okay. Yes, that is a myth. Number 4, strategic planning guides the acquisition and allocation of resources. Strategic planning guides the acquisition and allocation of resources. Truth or myth? Truth or myth? Yes, that is a truth. The strategic planning process is about building commitment. The strategic planning process is about building commitment. Truth or myth? Truth or myth? That is a truth. So you can give yourself a hand clap for that. Strategic planning predicts the future. Strategic planning predicts the future. Is that a myth or is that true? Absolutely. That is a myth. Wouldn't it be great if strategic planning did predict the future? So yes, I would agree. Is it nada or nada?
It's nada.
Nada. Yes. We all regrouped in the context of COVID-19, and some nonprofits that I'm aware of actually, pull that plan out and literally began to make changes to it as a result of that, for a lot of different reasons, as we all could imagine. And then the last one is strategic planning involves choosing specific priorities. Is that truth or myth? Truth or myth? Yes, that is truth. So we're going to look at goals, and we're going to prioritize those. We're going to establish some objectives, and we're going to prioritize those. So yes, we do go through that process. So in terms of just looking at our list, if I could just kind of recap these in the context of defining what strategic planning is. So strategic planning is systematic in that it calls for following a process that is both structured and data-based. That's number one. Number four, strategic planning guides the acquisition and allocation of resources. Number five, strategic planning, the process, is about building commitment. So typically, when the process is implemented, when those 8, 10, or 12 steps of a strategic planning process is implemented, oftentimes there's bonding that takes place. We recommit, we try to, when that process is being facilitated, you want it to help build teamwork, camaraderie, and also you want it to help you to uncover any conflicts that might be there, misunderstanding. So all of that helps us to foster that commitment that we need to build the plan, but also to implement the plan. And then, of course, strategic planning involves choosing specific priorities. So that is definitely what it is that we're trying to do here today. Let's move into the process, if you will. And you all help me pay attention to the chat as well. I'm kind of going back and forth on my screen here, so I don't want to miss any. There's none there now, but I just don't want to miss any as I'm transitioning from one thing to the next. So.
Quick question: was this a PDF that was included in the handout folder? And if so, what's the title?
Truth or myth?
Truth or myth. Okay, we had a couple of people asking, so look for truth or myth.
I'm sorry. It was a worksheet. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's okay. It's a worksheet. It should be in there, and it's called Truth or Myth. And we're working through each page. Looks like we're on page 2 of 27. So it's a long document. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Palmer.
Okay. All right. So we're going to focus on the process now. We're going to take a look at that. You have in your packet, you have a list of the process, of the strategic planning process. Leslie, I'm just going to have you go ahead and just, so in the strategic planning process, we mentioned some of this earlier. There is a, Leslie, go ahead and show them the next handout. This is also in their packet, just for the seeing. Yeah. So here's the actual process. Just want you to know that that's the next page. And now, Leslie, you can go back to the previous one. So oftentimes there is a cost involved when doing strategic planning. So you may want to think about a budget. If you're going to bring in a consultant to do strategic planning for you, then you want to think about how much do you have, how much can you afford to pay, or how much can you budget for that. It should be participatory, and it should be educational, for your staff or your board, etc. But also keep in mind that it is going to take time. you know, that it is going to take time. So you're going to have to allow time for that process. And hopefully after today, you'll have a better sense of what all these moving parts are so that you can adequately secure the resources that you need to actually do this. Now, some of you may have board members that know how to facilitate the strategic planning process, and they would be really helpful in that case. Okay, Leslie, you can go on to the next. I'm just having you show the handouts in this way. So a couple of more things I just want to talk about. So here's the strategic planning process, and we're going to walk through each one of these today. The first part of the process is to identify needs. Another part of the process is to review the mission and vision statement, and also to take in consideration if your value statements or your principles or your core values, some nonprofits have those added pieces of information as a part of what their mission is. And so this is a good time to review and confirm that these in fact are how you want them to read and what your organization is currently doing. Because from year to year or from plan to plan, you may very well have made some adjustments in what your mission and or your vision is. Develop goals, outcomes, and action steps. Determine, number 4, what your strengths are as an organization, what your weaknesses are, what opportunities are available to you, and what are some of the threats that might be barriers in your ability to move in the direction of accomplishing the goals and those outcomes that you just determined. Then we write the plan, then we implement the plan, and then we, Leslie, if you could move that up for me. And then we monitor and track progress, and then we evaluate and or we revise the plan. Now, today I've kind of expanded these steps. So where some of these have several items in one, I've kind of broken some of these out just so that we can spend some time focusing on these. The other thing that's important too, this is the next handout in your packet. The next thing that's important is a strategic planning committee. You may very well want to engage in, or you may very well want to have a strategic planning committee. And also you may want to set up some characteristics of people that you want to serve on the committee. The committee should be a fairly small group of individuals. Oftentimes the board chair will chair the strategic planning process. I chair a board right now. We have a consultant that is facilitating the strategic planning process for this nonprofit. And we have secured a consultant to do so. And then that committee has about 6 or 7 people on it. So this is an option for you in terms of the committee. Leslie, go to the capacity building resource doc, and let's look to see if that list of the strategic planning committee, we may just very well share that as a link, if we could. Any questions at this point? Any questions? So again, we are startup. This is startup. This is just getting ready. You know, we haven't even started strategic planning yet, but these are some things that we need to think about, you know, as we're pursuing this task. And we'll get into, again, some more detail.
Dr. Palmer, again,
Yeah.
my name is Matt, pronounce he, him. I'm in Charlotte, and our organization has a small board, but we do have 3 staffers. How common is it for how common or if are there any dangers in having the strategic planning process facilitated and led by staff? Board members will be involved, obviously, but is it normal to have staff leading and facilitating the strategic planning process?
It has a lot to do, Matt, with what type of interpersonal dynamic you want to foster. You know, if you have someone from staff, then we're all familiar with that staff person. We know them, etc. There may be some people who, you know, are very okay, you know, with kind of getting that direction from that person. So you don't have the neutrality when you utilize a staff person. So that's one main part of that. Whenever I help nonprofits with a strategic plan, I typically have them identify someone, be it board or staff, who actually helps to mechanically, I know this sounds real basic, but who mechanically helps type up the information for that plan. I don't type up the information. I think it's better for them to do it because then they have someone internal that really is spending time with the information in the plan. And then when I'm long gone, that person can help to implement that plan, and they can also fill in the gap sometimes once the consultant, let's just say, is gone and they're able to do it. So if that person, if that facilitator is a staff person, then you have the resource there all the time that helps you with the plan and help you put it together. I think the short answer to your question is it depends on what you want to foster in that strategic planning space. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions about kind of where we are with the startup?
A question from Christy. Does the Strategic Planning Committee evaluate the need for outside consultant?
Yes, the Strategic Planning Committee is very instrumental in helping to secure the consultant who's going to be responsible for doing your strategic plan. Yes.
Great. And then a quick question from Wendy, just regarding the handouts. I know they're all as separate rather than this one full one that we're going through. So will we be going through each of the docs corresponding with the strategic planning processes steps individually? And so she's just trying to get her handouts in order as we go through them.
Yes, on purpose, we put them in order. So they are in order, yes. Unless we made a mistake. Now, we could have made a mistake and put something out of order, but yes, that was our intent, was to put them in order.
So Leslie, as we're going through each one, if you have a moment to pop in the chat the title of the handout as they appear in the handout folder, that may help folks find the right handout. That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll keep repeating it as well. I'll keep repeating the name of the handout, but they should be in order.
Okay.
They should be. Yep. Okay. Last piece of information in startup. The next handout, and Leslie, if you would go to the handout, that might help too, if everybody can just kind of see. And if you're getting accustomed to receiving training virtually, you know, that is one of those nuances. You know, you're on your screen and you're having to, you know, your documents, I mean, your handouts are electronic, and you're trying to, you know, kind of see, you know, where we are and all of that. So everyone, please don't hesitate to let us know if you're not able to follow along. I will most certainly stop and make sure that we're all together. So please do that.
Which handout am I supposed to be pulling up again?
We are going to strategic planning choices.
Okay.
So there are some things to think about in this kind of startup space or phase of the strategic planning process. And one of those is to think about some decisions that you're going to need to make. And I'm not going to read each and every one of these. You can make it just, yeah, thank you, Leslie. But, you know, these are some things you want to think about. So we just kind of gave you a quick reference sheet so that you could go back, you know, at the time that you're trying to determine, you know, how you're going to go about implementing the strategic planning process. Matt posed the question, you know, having an internal stakeholder or a staff person be involved in the facilitation of the strategic planning process. That does happen. And if you have a limited budget, you know, that's going to be essential. If you've got somebody with those skills or expertise, by all means use those. That'll save you money on that part of it. The other part to think about is the length of your process. Typically, from start to finish, depending upon what methods you decide to use to complete each step in the process, it's going to take you about 6 months. You know, it used to be that I could work with a nonprofit and we could finish a strategic plan in about 3 or 4 months. It takes a little longer. There's a lot that we're thinking about and that we should be thinking about. There's quite a bit of reflection. You know, there's times where we start off really, really good and we've got really good momentum. And then for whatever reason, life happens, the organization has changes, and we might have to pause some. So I would say a 6-month window of time, you should be able to complete what I would consider to be a basic strategic plan. And then also your committee, deciding who's going to be on the committee, who's going to lead the process. I do think it's important to have a committee and to have a chairperson of that committee who understands strategic planning. I think that's important. Who's going to write the plan? I would put an asterisk here. As I mentioned before, I typically work with the staff to write the plan and or board members, because it is that organization's plan. It's not my plan, it's their plan. And I think that as much as you can involve staff and board members in handling the document as it's being developed, I think that pays off in the end in a positive way with buy-in and so on. Oftentimes there's a retreat. In particular, when you're working on the goals, oftentimes there's a retreat. We'll host a retreat. Everybody will come together. Sometimes it's staff and board. Sometimes it's just board. It just depends on what kind of financial resources your nonprofit has as to how you do that. And then we've already talked about hiring outside versus hiring inside. Okay, so that is startup. Do we need to take about a 3 to 5, like a 3-minute stretch break? If we could go back to gallery, do we need to take a quick break, or can we show me a thumbs up if we need a break with your reaction? I can see that easier than I can see. Do we need to take a break? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 5. Okay, break it is.
Yeah. Good call, good call.
Thank you. All right, so yes, so step away, stop your video, or however you want to step away for a few minutes.
Great, we'll gather back here at say 10:45.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Continue with our process here. Leslie, if you would go back to the PowerPoint for me with the slide that has the process, kind of back up one. I just want us to see where we are and where we're headed. All right, so we just finished startup and we're going to chip away at this. And now we're going into preparing to plan. Then we'll do needs assessment. Then we will do asset mapping, and then we'll focus on the mission and the vision. When we, as a part of the preparing the plan, we're also going to do a breakout coming up here in just a minute. So if you would, in your handouts, go to your handout that reads Ready to Plan. Is your organization ready to plan? And Leslie, if you would go to the preparing to plan slide, and I can just kind of let everybody know what we are. There we go. So we're going to look at why plan. Is your organization ready to plan? Involvement and commitment. Who should be involved? Useful documents. Choices. We're going to revisit that choices handout. And then also we're going to look at an actual work plan. So this is just kind of getting prepped for planning. Now, we already talked about what strategic planning is. We looked at the truths and myths and all of that. We are, in terms of thinking about strategic planning, it helps nonprofits to do a better job. It helps us to be better leaders. It helps us to be intentional about our priorities. And it also helps us to be proactive in terms of where we want our nonprofit to end up over a set of years. So again, in your packet, you have a handout that's titled, Is Your Organization Ready to Plan? So if you would go to that, and Leslie, I'm going to have you go back to the handouts and just go to that next handout, Is Your Organization Ready to Plan? So, and I just want to, I'm sorry, Rebecca, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was going to say, while she's pulling that up and people are finding that in their handouts, a question had come in from Sharon, and you may be getting to this later, but what is the best way to choose a consultant?
So what I would say is, one, understand what strategic planning is yourself and what the process involves. And you want to interview a person or persons just like you would a job interview. You know, so what are your expectations? What is it that you need them to do? You might even think about persona. You know, what kind of persona does this person have? Is it a good match with your board's personality and your staff personality and your culture? Do they understand the mission of your nonprofit? So again, my response is quite practical, but that's really kind of the essence of it. You know, you want them to be a good match, and you also want to maybe see a plan that they've actually produced, and that way you can see the end product as well. Ask them about their method, like what approach do they use? I mentioned before, I typically work with staff and board members on the hands-on typing the information that's actually going to go into the template for the plan. So those are some things I would think about.
That's great. Yeah, that question comes in quite a bit, and it's actually something that I passed on to our marketing director to address in an upcoming newsletter with some resources tagged. If you're a member, you can go to Info Central and search just consultant there and find a bunch of great resources as well. Thanks, Dr. Palmer.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So one thing, I just want you to know that this worksheet is here. This is your organization ready to plan. If you haven't started already, go ahead and begin to kind of review this and know whether this is definite for you, well, maybe or not sure, or definitely not. So you just, in terms of just thinking about, we just wanted you to think about, you know, is your organization ready to do this? Does it have the time? You know, do you already have goals in place? Do you already reflect on your strengths and weaknesses? Do you know what it is that you're evaluating in terms of impact as it relates to meeting your mission and fulfilling your vision? So these are the kind of questions that you want to pose in terms of readiness. And then the way in which you calculate this is you kind of add up your ones, your twos, and your threes. You add all those up, and you'll actually get a total number. So I'm gonna just pause here for about 2 to 3 minutes, and I'm gonna let you complete this based on the 3 choices that you have. I see that question, and I think you should look at this from the role in which you serve. Because if I was using this in a nonprofit, I might have the board members complete this, I might have staff complete this, and then what I would do is compile that information and come back with some feedback as to how ready we are. So everyone's perspective is relevant when it comes to this process, because typically quite a few of your stakeholders are going to be involved. Does that help? So I am going to move us along here. So what you want to do is add up your points real quickly, and then in the chat, if you would just put what your points are. Thank you, Jackie, DW. Thank you, Andy. Any more points out there? $15, $17, I see Michelle. Thank you, everyone. Leslie, can you show us the scoring chart so we can see how ready we are? That's in the capacity building resource. Oh no, there it is. I'm sorry, it's right there. Great. All right, so you can determine how ready you are as a representative of your nonprofit. So if you're 20 or more, your organization is ready for a strategic planning process. If it's 15 to 19, your organization probably would benefit from the process. And if you're 14 or less, there's no urgency, but your organization should at least do strategic planning 3 years after your last strategic planning process. So again, this just kind of gives us a general idea of kind of where you are. And you can, for some of you who maybe know how to do this, you could set this up in a quick SurveyMonkey kind of assessment, get feedback from everybody, and voila, you have some insight as to whether or not people, your stakeholders are ready. Kind of moving on, or well, comments about this. Any comments that you have? If you would, you can unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat. And if we could go back to the gallery view.
Looks like we have a question from Shauna. How often should an organization plan to strategically plan?
2 to 3 years.
Hi, this is Jackie. I just wanted to add that we completed ours last year. Well, yeah, December of last year. And I'm glad that we did, because it actually helped us during COVID for us to make some, moves that we needed to do. And because the opportunity presented itself, we were ready to do that.
Okay.
This is Kenan.
So,
Sorry, Dr. Palmer. I just had a quick question. So if we're about to enter into a strategic planning process and we know that things organizationally and even financially are very much up in the air as a result of the pandemic, should we not consider a shorter time frame for like an interim plan or intermediary plan that then allows us to kind of right the ship and balance things out before we get to a longer 2 to 3 year plan?
yes, I call that an action plan. So, yeah, so you may want to, prior to the more extensive plan, you may very well want to do that. As a matter of fact, do you go by Ken or Kenan?
It's Kenan.
Kenan, okay. As a matter of fact, what I encourage executive directors to do is to chart that out for themselves as the person who's going to be responsible for managing the plan anyway. And then let that be the springboard for the more extensive plan. But yes, absolutely. You could spend time with your board, you could spend time with your staff and talk through, well, what should we focus on over the next 12 months? Or over the next 18 months, what should we focus on? And you can definitely do that. I think that is a good idea. And it's a warm up, it's a warm up for the more extensive plan. Yeah. Is there another question? I saw something pop up here on the bottom, but it kind of
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
We were due to renew our strategic plan this year and had done the work. We had distilled down 3 versions that we could move forward with. And we're sort of in the process of going through those 3 directions and then March happened and pandemic. And so we kind of just put ourselves into sort of survival mode, status quo mode. At what point do we say, okay, we're ready to revisit this? Are there certain metrics, outside indicators, because pandemic's kind of dragging on? I mean, a little longer, because we thought, okay, we'll put it off till December. Things are not going to be normal in December. I don't know that we're ready to pursue a new direction then. So what are the sort of things we should be looking at to say, okay, it's normal enough to start planning for another year, or to set it, if not for 3 years, what time do we decide now it's normal enough to start making longer term plans?
Jen, I think it's your call. I mean, you know better than I do when it seems as though you might be going in a different direction than say if you have an existing plan, let's say you might be going in a different direction, then hey, we probably need to take some time to review this plan, because I'm not sure if you're the executive director or not, but as the executive director, you are the captain, of this ship. And so you start to see things going in a different direction than what you have on paper. And your board is inquiring and making demands based on what you have on paper. It's time for you to then kind of revisit that to say, well, external factors are causing us to have to move in a different direction. And so we need to revisit this plan. Just like the bylaws, the strategic plan can be revised anytime you deem it necessary. Now, we don't want to revise it, every 6 months, but we definitely, if you see some significant change like the coronavirus and all of your staff and volunteers and everybody's schedules changing and how we're working, yeah, that's a signal that, we might need to revisit this. But for some organizations who never stopped, right, in the wake of COVID-19, their plan may be just moving along just okay, because they actually never stopped. So I think anytime you see some deviation from what it is that you have in that existing plan, then you know it's time for you to revisit it. And there is nothing wrong with the executive director sitting with the plan, making some notes about what needs to be changed, and presenting that to your board. That's very appropriate to do that. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Rebecca, I see you. You look like you are about to give me a question.
Yeah, there was one question related to DEI and whether or not, this was from Shauna, thank you, Shauna, whether there should be prior DEI training or if we incorporate intentional DEI concepts into the strategic plan, trying to make sure that DEI is also a perpetual permanent focus for the organization.
Yes. You could do that. If that is going to be an essential component of moving forward for your nonprofit, then yes, you may want to get everybody on the same page with the concept, right? With that philosophy in terms of how you're going to implement and promote your programs and how your nonprofit is going to function. So yes, it's a good idea if you could get a little bit get a little grounded in this concept. And in particular, if you know for sure, and you know better than I, that there may be some challenges with some people making that transition, then yes, you definitely want to help them to get ready for that. But I do encourage it. I do encourage it early on. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay. All right. In your handout, there is, I'm looking at my time here. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and complete what we have outlined for preparing the plan, and then we're going to do a quick breakout. So, but I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do that. So there is a document that Leslie is going to share with you titled Useful Documents. And we are going to share that with you in a link. Is that right, Leslie?
I can share it in a link, so I will do that.
Okay. Okay. All right. And then if you would show that. I didn't want to leave. I'm trying to make sure I didn't leave out. I don't want to. We have so much great information that we want to share with you. I just need to double check something here before I move on. Just want to make sure that I am keeping up with what you've got in your packet. Leslie, sorry, go back to the handouts and go to who should be involved. Leslie should get lots of hand claps because she is so great in helping me as well as Rebecca in navigating all the information that we have for you. And keep in mind, I know, you know, I've mentioned this last week, there are times when I will incorporate information based on the questions that you ask. I don't always know what questions are going to come up. So if we have information that we can share related to that, then I will have our team add that in as we're moving along. So I don't want anybody to get frustrated by the fact that we add information, but I do want to be in real time responding to your questions. So, okay, so who should be involved is one of the handouts, and a couple questions have come up related to this. This is a quick reference, and what's so useful about this particular handout is that we give you the different roles that may exist in your organization, and we describe how they could be involved, and then we also give an indication of what their commitment should be, okay? So we give you the role, we describe how they could be involved, and then we give you an indication or just some notes here on what the commitment of that person is going to be. So this is I think, a real helpful tool in terms of identifying that, who should be involved. The next, and we're going to do a breakout here in a minute, and you'll be able to refer back to this document. The next piece of information in this whole idea of preparing to plan is the choices handout that we talked about earlier. That's a previous handout. I'm just referring you back to that. So if you wanted to make notes where you have preparing the plan, just note to yourself that you have another handout on strategic planning choices. And that's also a good resource as you're getting geared up for planning. The next item that I want you to look at in your handouts, there's a sheet that says decisions. We've already covered that. Strategic planning decisions, we've already covered that. So go to the next page, which is the work plan. And Leslie, if you could show that. Strategic planning decisions is already covered. And then the next item is the work plan. It is the next page in the different work plan. It's in the handouts, Leslie. It's the next page. Okay. So if you need, if you're like me, you might need just a little checklist or something that you can use to kind of generate what it takes for you to actually get ready, plan for strategic planning. So you want to identify what activities are you going to do. You want to identify what approach you're going to take or what methods you're going to use in that work plan, who's going to be involved, what kind of outcomes are you going to anticipate as it relates to actually kind of moving forward and managing all the moving parts of implementing the strategic planning process. We're going to come back to this handout too, but I wanted you to know that it's there because it comes up next in your handout. Now, Leslie, we can go to useful documents in the CBR. Last piece of information for preparing to plan. Last piece of information. Useful documents. So Leslie is going to share this particular resource as a link in the chat. But we were working on this, and I thought, you know, I didn't put it in the handouts, but I didn't want to leave it out either. And so here is the useful documents, and basically what it is it gives us an idea of what documents would be handy. So what documents would be handy in order for you to be able to reference as you're trying to engage in the strategic planning process. Now, I know at this point you might be feeling overwhelmed because I'm giving you quite a bit of information. But keep in mind, as you're moving through the process, the way in which you use the information aligns with the steps that you would be taking. So that's why we have these handouts so that you can refer back to them. So again, I know this may be just a lot of information coming at you, but it's information that you need as you're trying to determine your way forward as it relates to strategic planning. So you might need to reference your mission statement, your vision statement. I know you will have to do that. You might need to reference your bylaws. You might need to look back at minutes. You just don't ever know. And if you have a consultant, you're going to have to onboard that consultant. So you're going to have to help them to become acquainted with your organization and to learn more about what your organization does. So, that's why we're sharing this piece of information. How accessible is this information for you to give to the person that's going to be managing and kind of sharing as it relates to and facilitating the strategic planning process? I think I see a question. Oh, that's Leslie posting our link. Okay. If we could go back to gallery view. So we've done startup. We've done preparing the plan. I know that's a lot of information, but we have more to go. So what I would like is for us to go into breakouts. And in your breakout session, I just want you to spend some time talking about what you've heard so far. So just kind of talking about what makes sense to you. You know, maybe there's a question you have that one of your classmates or one of your colleagues might be able to answer for you, or maybe they have some insight. So I want you to sit with this startup and preparing the plan information for a few minutes. And so we're going to have you go into breakouts and spend about 5 minutes, Rebecca, and just kind of give everybody an opportunity to take a breath, gather ourselves, because I just gave you so much and there's so much more to go. And then we'll come back and we will move into needs assessment and asset mapping.
Great. Sounds good. So 5 minutes, it's about 11:12 now. I'm going to open up all the rooms and we'll see you back here in about 5. And we can begin.
All right, thank you. So welcome back. Hopefully you had a minute to just catch your breath with all of that information that I shared. But we want to make sure that you are, you know, learning and getting as much of the resources. I want to share as much of what we have with you. So keep that in mind. Also, I'm paying attention here to, I think these are maybe chats when they went into breakout rooms. I don't know, Rebecca. I see some movement in the chat there. So maybe all that's already been taken care of since we're on the other side of the breakout. So we're going to get geared up to talk about needs assessments and asset mapping.
Wait, Dr. Palmer.
I'm
so sorry to interrupt. This is a dire need because our colleague DW Hooper was telling us some real essential facts. So DW Hooper, if you are here, please, can we like get your email address? We'll just like find you in the chat, okay, before we go on.
Okay.
Okay, because what you had to say was so essential. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Okay. Go ahead, DW.
Okay, did you want me to answer the question or just submit my or finish my thought or just share my email with the team?
I don't know. I'm following Shauna's lead, so I think she's wanting you to comment about something.
Yeah, if you could just, so we were talking about strategic plans and 2 to 3 years versus 5 years, and DW Hooper said there's an annual something that happens 5 years, and then, so just finish that thought because maybe group 2 might not be the only people that need to hear that. Just finish that and then we can.
Sure. So I'm with Communities in Schools of Wake County, and we have a 3 to 5 year strategic plan. But each year there's an operating plan that is called the annual operating plan. And that annual operating plan is tied back to the 3 to 5 year strategic plan. And so we compartmentalize the action steps needed to see the 3 to 5 year plan come to fruition each year. And so when we have COVID hit, there's really not a tweak to the 3 to 5 year plan, but there's a tweak in the annual operating plan itself because it guides the steps that we're taking for the fiscal year in order to achieve the 3 to 5 strategic goals. Does that make sense?
It does.
Dr.
Yes.
Palmer?
Yes, absolutely. So that is a way to structure your strategic planning movement, if I could say that. DW, I don't know the answer to this question, and I don't know if you do, but there is a cost associated with that type of a planning apparatus. I would venture to say, I don't know how large your Communities in Schools organization is. I would imagine there's several locations. You're talking about, I'm just gonna ballpark, $25,000, $30,000 maybe, in order for you to actually be able to have a strategic planning mechanism like that. That is not what we're showing you how to do per se. That is automated, it sounds like. I would imagine there are work groups and work teams. I would imagine it's color coded. I would imagine that it is highly systematic from a digital perspective. So what I would encourage you all to do is to do your homework on what that cost would be, because I really think it's going to be up in the 25, 30,000. Our school district does a strategic plan on that level, and it probably costs $75,000 for them to do that every time they do. So it is awesome for a strategic planning geek like myself. It is awesome, and it is, you know, it's great if you can afford that, but that comes with a significant price tag.
Well, if I can jump in, DW is one of our team members with CIS Wake. We apparently are doing the Walmart version of it. So it is, we are not at that level of rigor. So if anything is digital, it's because DeJuan strikes through whatever it is that we didn't get it. We're not doing it on that level in terms of sophistication. It still is very much in-house, and we're still in the process of finalizing it. But yeah, it's pretty more, yes, the dollar store, Family Dollar version. We are still a nonprofit. We actually were funded to pay just for the facilitator. And so part of the roles and responsibilities in executing it on an annual basis is still very much run in-house, and it's very manually done and things of that nature. So yeah, so the sophistication that you indicated, I'm sure it hit that price tag.
If you don't mind, and if you don't want to share this, please don't, but since this was brought up, do you know what the cost of your facilitator was for your strategic planning process?
We wrote it in a budget, so I can't remember. It was somewhere between $2,500 and $3,000 for the facilitator.
Okay, and then it sounds like you have a lot of staff that are actually carrying out the mechanics of it. Is that right?
Well, listening to some of the other people that I've been in breakout rooms, it sounds like we have a corporation compared to a lot of the work that's being done. But in terms of our true full-time staff who will execute this, there are 4.
Okay. All right. So I just want to contextualize for everyone, you know, how you're able to accomplish that. The people you have that sounds like they have some skill set and they understand the process, and they know how to utilize the resources you have in-house in order for you to get that type of I would say, implementation process in order for you to be able to activate that. I just want, you know, everybody on the call to know that there's my lens, as you're describing this, both of you, is telling me that there's someone in your organization who understands strategic planning and that they are the coach on this, and they're utilizing whatever resources you have in-house in order to carry it out.
Mhm.
And that's phenomenal. That's phenomenal when you have that kind of resource in-house. I think it was Matt or Kenan who asked, maybe it was Matt, that asked the question about, well, can you have someone internal do this for you? And I started breaking down how that might work. And it sounds like you have a really good example of that. But I would venture to say there's someone in the mix that really does understand how this process works, so that you have those different elements of it. DW, you were going to say something, I can
Yeah,
see.
I was just gonna say that LaToya is right. Our strategic plan was facilitated, and it was at a moderately inexpensive, I guess, contingent on. But before that, the process by which we're facilitating, we were the grant recipients of a capacity building grant, and I think it was, LaToya, remind me if it was IBM. And so because of that structure, we've been able to, integrate our infrastructure. So we just utilize the same process that came with the big ticket, and we just, maintained. Yeah. So that's how we were able to.
And thank you so much for sharing that, because that is a really good example of, again, you looking at what resources you have internally. And it sounds like you decided that your capacity building grant was going to be for strategic planning, so there, I can see that they're somewhere in the mix. As I said before, someone had some vision around how this could work, and they pulled all those resources together so that all these different things that we're talking about today, that there were resources in-house for you to be able to do it, so that you could do the Walmart version, if I could borrow from LaToya, so that you could do the Walmart version of this. There's so many ways that this can be implemented. And so there is no one way to do it. But what is consistent are these 8, 9, 10 steps. Those are consistent across most any strategic planning process that you do. Having a good facilitator, having someone who understands how to connect the resources, as you can see in the example here with communities and schools, it pays off, if you have that kind of resource. Okay, all right, here we go. Needs assessment. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying thanks.
Yeah, okay. All right, so needs assessment and asset mapping. In your handout packet, you have a description of what a needs assessment is, and you have a description of what asset mapping is. So Leslie, I'm gonna I'm gonna do this a little differently than we planned, just because I wanna make sure I cover everything. So the first thing we're gonna look at here is the purpose of a needs assessment. So when we do a needs assessment, we're trying to identify the concerns and strengths of our community. And we're trying to develop initiatives within our nonprofit to address those needs based on what our mission and vision is. And so that's what our needs assessment is all about. If you could go to the asset mapping, Leslie, I'm gonna just go right on to those because I wanna make sure we cover everything. Go back to asset mapping. Try CBR. So again, with the asset mapping, we are going to put a link in the chat for that, but I want to just talk about the difference of the two, and you can kind of hand note this. So we do needs assessments and we do asset mapping. We do needs assessments to determine what the gaps are in the community so that in alignment with our mission, so that we can create goals that align with what those gaps are. We do asset mapping so that we can identify community resources of value, and we try to identify where those resources are located in that community to support our mission and vision. So needs assessment, asset mapping. Those are two processes that we use. In your packet, you have, Leslie, go back to handouts and go to the needs assessment process. So you should have in your packet a document that looks like this, a handout that looks like this. So that needs assessment process requires us to develop a plan to conduct the needs assessment. And it also requires us to develop a plan to implement the asset mapping process as well. And so, we would create the plan, and then what we typically do is we develop a committee. That would be number one under creating the plan, and then we set the time frame. Leslie, can you go to the next handout for me? This was gonna be an activity, but I'm going to have to modify. So go to the CBR. And then you can, then everybody can see this filled in. So I'm gonna keep working through this document. So I want to make sure. Here we go. You have the worksheet. So I'm going to have you fill this in with me as I go through it. And we will make sure that you get this particular copy. I'm just having to modify a little bit. So the first thing that we do, both for the needs assessment and asset mapping, we develop a committee. It's always good for for the work that we do in the strategic planning process that you have work groups. So a group that is going to focus on making sure everything is completed. So we develop that committee, and then we set the time frame. Remember, I mentioned before about 6 months to do a strategic plan. The needs assessment is a part of that process. Therefore, if the needs assessment is a part of that process, we've got to gauge how much time we spend on the needs assessment. We're going to determine how we're going to inquire with our stakeholders on what the needs are. We're going to inquire with stakeholders on what the assets are. And we might do that through a survey. We might do that through interviews. We might do that through focus groups. Those are the ways in which we collect that information. So we have to determine what geographic area are we doing the needs assessment on, and what geographic area are we identifying assets. We might have to create incentives for people to give us feedback on what the needs are and what the assets are. We might have to have some kind of forum. We might have to recruit extra volunteers. So it just depends on how are you going to learn more about what the needs are, and how are you going to learn more about what the assets are. So that's going to take some research on our part. Once you have all of that information, you're going to summarize that information, and you're going to come up with what your results and what your findings are, and then you're going to report out on that. What you want to make a note of is when your board or when your nonprofit does the retreat, typically you share the information that you found in the, you share the information that you learned from the needs assessment and the asset mapping. So I kind of had to group those two things together just in terms of time today. But definitely, this is kind of the process. It's the same process for asset mapping. It's the same process. The only difference is you're looking for assets as opposed to looking at needs, but you're following that same process. You also are going to, if you could go back to the handouts, Leslie, you're going to develop the committee that we talked about in terms of doing the needs assessment and the asset mapping. So you have this in your packet. It's titled Develop a Committee, and then the one that follows that is the time frame. So needs assessment and asset mapping. you're going to have to kind of create time for that. Rebecca, I see you. So that's my cue. Is there a question?
Yes, there is, but I was
Okay.
gonna pop in when you had a moment. So I think it's a
No,
good
you go right ahead.
A question from Sharon. She's asking a question about how do you keep the committee, the task force on task, keeping that 30,000 foot view and staying out of the weeds. For instance, there was an organization she knew of who they were going to talk about or wanted to put in the strategic plan how to answer the phone, for instance. And so how do you approach it? How do you keep everyone on task at sort of the higher level throughout the process?
If you have an external facilitator, that's what their job is to keep everybody on task. But it does take the executive director to help with that, because when you run into pauses in the process, the executive director can kind of keep that moving. So the executive director and your consultant, if you're fortunate enough to have one, they're the ones that are keeping everybody on task, and the chair of the strategic planning committee. That's why you have the committee, so that they can kind of help move things along.
And then there was a question from Valerie. Do we have any sample needs assessment and or asset mapping surveys that you can share with the group?
Yeah, I will. There is an asset mapping resource, Rebecca. If you would make a note when we debrief, I will give you that link and you can put it in the wraparound. And then we do have some, and I'll do the same for the needs assessment samples that we have. So I'll provide that in the wraparound for both of those. Is that it for my questions?
Yep, you're good to continue.
Great. Leslie, if you could go to capacity assessment and capacity building in our CBR, and if you could give everybody a link to that. So another area that we need to focus on as far as the needs assessment and asset mapping is capacity. And we've already studied this. We studied this during the orientation when you assess capacity. So if you could go to the definition of capacity here. So needs assessment, asset mapping, and check on your capacity of your nonprofit in general. If we're going to do a strategic plan, we need to incorporate in the planning or consider the capacity of the nonprofit right now. And so while we may have some goals that we aspire to achieve, it may or may not be possible in the time frame that we want, because we may not necessarily have the capacity to do so. So I encourage and facilitate a capacity assessment process as a part of the strategic planning task that we have. So you'll see here, again, this was, we talked about this back during the orientation when you did the capacity assessment. And Leslie is going to give you a link to this in the chat. And if we could go back to gallery view, thank you. So we are covering a lot of territory today. The next piece of information is the mission and the vision. So it's necessary for us to review the mission and the vision so that we, if we need to make any modifications to that, we can do that during this time. So the mission and the vision. In your, let's see. In your handouts, and Leslie, if you could, I just want to make sure, you have in your packet, you have a mission handout, and you also have a vision handout. And so if we could go to that, it's a mission statement worksheet, and you also have a vision statement worksheet. And Leslie, if you could, I know I just said go to gallery, but now I need to go back to the handouts. The good news is the last 3 items that we're going to talk about today are all 3 in handout form. So just to kind of get your mind kind of wrapped around how the next 30 or 40 minutes is going to be, we're going to do a little bit of hands-on with the mission, some hands-on with the goals and action steps, and then the latter part, the last 3 items are 3 handouts that we're going to share with you. And I do believe we're going to do those in a link format. So, so for your mission statement, what we want you to consider when you're doing your strategic plan is to look at your mission statement and then think about ways that your mission statement needs to be edited. So you have a worksheet here to kind of help you to be able to do that. Leslie, you can go to the next one. And then we also have the same for the vision statement. So again, the task here is to be able to review your mission and your vision and make modifications if you need to. I know sometimes we think once we write a mission statement, it's the one and done, but you really should be reviewing it regularly. And so, Leslie, the next is the goals and the action steps. So there's a singular document in your packet that looks like this. So goals, action steps, and outcomes. I think I see a couple of questions in the chat.
Yes. It looks like I'll have Leslie check on this, just a heads up that the capacity doc was only sent to chat with me and not everyone. Corey was asking, there we go, thanks Leslie. Do you have some 5-star mission and vision statements you could share? I don't know if that's something we want to share in the wraparound. And Shauna has said, this is the first time I've heard that it's okay for mission statement to evolve and change and modify.
Yes, most definitely. Things do change. Some nonprofits change their name, lots of things happen over the life of a nonprofit. And I see this comment here, like if you are part of a larger nonprofit that has, where there are chapters or there are chartered entities, then you may share a mission and a vision. You may not necessarily choose that for your self. And I'm not sure what the guidelines are for some of those organizations, but oftentimes you have to align with what their missions and visions are. So thank you for that comment. All right, so goals, action steps, and outcomes. Let's talk about writing our goals, our action steps, and our outcomes. So we want our goals and our action steps to be SMART, and some of you have heard of that acronym. So we want our goals to be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. And what we did is we built in some worksheets for you in order for us to practice this. And I didn't want us to go too swiftly without us being able to put this in a part of our process today. I would also encourage us to use the SMART theory or the acronym when you write your action steps and when you write your outcome statements. So I would encourage us to do that. And I would also make a note on this sheet. Your goals are your what are we going to do? Your action steps are how we're going to go about achieving this goal. And your outcome statement is why. So we'll say that again. Your goals are your what. What is it that we're going to do in order for us to achieve this goal and meet our mission and vision intent? How are we going to go about achieving this goal, action step, and why, which is the outcome? So what we built into the training is we built in a sample of each of these. So we have a sample goal, we have a sample set of action steps, and we have a sample outcome to go with it. So Leslie, if you could just move us through. So this is your goal statement example. And then keep going for me, Leslie, and then we're gonna keep going. This is our worksheet for writing the goal statement, okay? Keep going. This is our action step example, okay, that goes with that goal. Here is our writing action step worksheet. And then here's our outcome statement example. And then here is our outcome statement worksheet. All right. So let's go back to gallery view, and everyone should have these documents in front of you. Give me just a little bit of a reaction that that we all have what we need here. So we gave you an example. Great, I see some thumbs up. Thank you all for using that, because that's real easy for me to see the thumbs up. So you have an example of each one of these. And what I want us to do is to practice writing one goal, a set of action steps, and an outcome statement to go with it, okay? We're gonna practice one goal, one set of action steps, and a outcome statement to go with it. Does everybody good with that task? Okay. Rebecca, I want us to go in breakouts for this. So while you're going to be working individually on your assignment, I would spend more time just working on the assignment, but we want you to do that in a space with your colleagues. So everybody has their own individual assignment. You can chat a little bit if you want, but we're going to give you 10 minutes to do this because it's going to take a little bit of time. Everybody okay?
All right, here we go. Thanks.
All right, Rebecca, you can do
I'm going to open up the rooms and we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes.
Okay. Hopefully you were able to craft a goal statement and action steps to go along with that and an outcome statement. And basically, this is the heart, what I consider to be kind of the heart and soul of the strategic plan are the goals. Some plans might have 20 goals and 20 sets of action steps. I recommend goal statement and outcome statement to accompany that, and then your action steps. What were the 3 questions that I suggested that you mark on your single sheet with all 3 of those? What was the question for, and you can use the chat if you'd like, what was the question for goals? What question are we answering? So for goals, it was what? What are we going to do in order for us to achieve what we intend in this strategic plan? What was the question for action steps? Correct. It was how we're going to go about achieving this goal. And what was the question for outcomes? Why? So why do we need to achieve this goal? Why do we need to invest money, time, labor, people, resources? Why do we need to do this? So ultimately what ends up happening is we have a set of these throughout the plan. And you probably noticed in a strategic plan, there's typically like a template and a section for each one of these. But before we get to that final kind of document that we create for each of these, or to house all of this information, the what, the what, the how, and the why, we also do what we call a SWOT analysis. And what we do is we determine what are the strengths of our nonprofit in being able to achieve this goal, implement these action steps, and experience this outcome. That we do a SWOT analysis in order for us to be able to determine what, or analyze, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what opportunities does this present, and what threats are there in terms of us actually being able to carry out this set of intent, this set of intent that we have. So in your packet, we have given you or provided a tool for you to use to help you to be able to do this. So Leslie, if you could take me to the handouts. And if you could real quick, when you get there, just go ahead and show me what for the SWOT. Yeah, so just show me all of what's there for the SWOT. Then I just don't. You're right. Keep going up. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So come back. Yeah. So the SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's what we're trying to analyze. Go ahead to the next one. And so here is our, what is the next one? Is the next one, I might need you to go, yeah, this is the one I want to go to right there. So here is how we view strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So this is titled Examples of SWOTs, right? Examples of strengths, examples of weaknesses, examples of opportunities, and examples of threats. And so ultimately what we want you to do is we want you to identify, for the goal that you wrote, the action steps that you wrote to accompany it, and the outcome statement. We want you to do a little bit of work on your on the SWOT. So Leslie, back up one. So here is your blank sheet. So if you could envision, you could make, I don't know, 20 copies of this. Let's just say if you've crafted 20 goals, you could make 20 copies of this, and then you would identify what you do the SWOT analysis for each set of that information. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of time to write out what strengths does your nonprofit have in terms of being able to achieve this goal, implement these action steps, and experience this outcome. What weaknesses does your organization have that relate to this goal and relates to what you have in your action steps and your outcome statement? What opportunities do you think this might present, and what threats are there that you might be aware of? Some threats are unanticipated, but what threats might we experience if we try to achieve this goal? So I'm going to give you just a few minutes to just work on filling this in, because our goal today is to walk you through each of these steps so you know what happens within each step. So if you have to hire a facilitator, for example, you know what you're hiring them to do. So I'm just going to pause here, and if we could do the gallery view, and I'm just going to let you spend some time with that. How is everybody doing? Give me, if you're doing okay, give me a hand clap. I know, or a thumbs up, I'm sorry, either one. Just give me an idea of how you're doing. This is a lot of information, but you're going to be so glad you have it. Awesome. Thank you all. I can see some, I can see the the responses showing up. So thank you. You know, we started the Institute by sharing with you that it was hands-on and participatory. So just, this is the way in which we want you to develop the skills, and not just the what, but we want you to know how to do these things. Well, good. As long as the information is helpful and useful, that's important to us at the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. So we want to make sure it's useful. And also that you can walk out of this workshop and be able to use what we've shared. That's important to us. So Leslie, if you could take us back to the PowerPoint slide that has all of what we were going to cover today. Thank you. So here we are. We have just finished the SWOT. So we have 2 documents or 3 documents for you in terms of writing the plan, implementing the plan, monitoring and tracking progress. We're going to focus on writing and implementing a strategic plan. So Leslie, if we could go to the work plan handout. So we're going to pull it all together. And oftentimes when you open up a strategic plan, you're going to see a list of what the goals are, and then you're actually going to see like individual sections for each goal. And in those sections, you're going to see outcomes, you're going to see action steps, etc. And so what we did here in your packet is we gave you a visual of what that could look like. Now, you might design this in a different way, but this is a Word document. And so you might be able to create this, especially if there's someone in your organization that knows a little bit about graphic design or a little bit about publisher, or some of those resources. You can create your own individual templates for your goal, outcomes, action step information. So you see in the goal column, we've got the what, and then in the anticipated outcome, we've got why, and then the how are the action steps. And notice we added who and when. We added who and when. So you can create this yourself, and you may actually come up with another design. This will help you to minimize the cost if you are going to use a consultant. If you say, hey, if you facilitate the process for us to get the information, then maybe you can do this part in-house if you're trying to really kind of manage your budget here.
Dr.
Yes,
So I guess I'm wondering in the why question, I guess I'm more used to seeing something about what problem is this addressing, right? So like, how do we know that, how did you come to arrive at the, that the solution was to create this management model for capacity building? What problem is it solving, and how do you know that that problem exists? So is that supposed to be captured anywhere in the goals?
So it would have, your goals are generated based on your needs assessment and your asset mapping. So you determine what the needs were way back in the a couple of steps back. So you identify what the needs are. And now you are going to craft that outcome, where you crafted the goals based on what the needs were. We didn't just kind of create goals. I know in this training, it may seem like that because you didn't see the data from that. But in real life, here on High Point University's campus, we actually did this. We went out and we asked nonprofits, what did they need? And they told us they needed capacity building resources, basically. And so what we said is that we're going to create a program, if you will, to address that need. And I could go on and on with that story, but that's how we knew that. And so the outcome was, in this case, to actually have that apparatus in place, because we would, here on this campus, faculty would get calls from nonprofits in the community because they taught nonprofit management, and they would say, hey, can you help us with grant writing? Well, hey, can you help us with fundraising? And so what the faculty said here was, we are going to create a program that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we get a phone call. We're just going to be able to reach for our material and go help people. So that's the backstory to this outcome.
Right. That makes total sense to me. I guess I'm wondering, do you not have to or need to have the why kind of somehow reflected in the actual goal or work plan?
So it is in this case, because if you look at the goal, it is to create, develop, and establish a capacity building resource. Stop right there. Then go over to the outcome. We're going to develop and implement a management model for capacity building and establish a permanent resource. There's the match. Are you with me?
Sort of. I mean, in my mind,
Okay.
that doesn't answer a why question. And
Okay.
I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just really trying to grasp it for myself as I think through my goals. I'm just not sure that answers the why question the way that I'm thinking about what the why question is, and I guess I'm just wondering.
There is no one way to write an outcome statement.
Right.
There is no one way to write a goal statement. The way you write your outcome statement may be very different than mine.
Mm-hmm.
If you hired 5 consultants, they might all write their outcome statement or manage that process differently. And so you, as the nonprofit and the originator of that goal, and you're also the originator of the problem, right? Because you're helping to determine what the problem is. There is no one way to do it. So don't assume that because this is a frame that we're providing, that this is the only way. This is not the only way. The way you're thinking about it is very important, because your strategic plan should be customized based on the capacity of you and your nonprofit to be able to contribute to how to comprise your outcome statement.
Right, great.
There's no wrong.
Great.
This is Sharon Moyer from the Partnership for Children. Valerie and I were in the same breakout room. Valerie, talking about the community need. Yeah, yeah, that's the why you're talking about, right? So identifying a gap in service, or identifying a community's need, unmet need.
So Rebecca, if you would make a note, I have more goals and outcome statements that I can share. So if you would make a note that I share a service delivery type of goal and outcome statement, one that focuses on maybe a tutorial program, or one that focuses on a domestic violence program, or something that's more in alignment with a community-based need. Very good question, Valerie. And this is how you want to be, this is how you want to think about this, because if you decide that a consultant is going to help you, this is how you help the consultant help you better, because you're able to share what your intent is, or what you are hoping that this document is going to convey to people. Does that help you, Valerie? But I'll bring some other goals and outcome statements. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yes. Okay, we're gonna move on to our monitoring and tracking progress. And Leslie, I think you're going to CBR, right? Or is that next? Are you going to?
CBR, yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, Leslie is gonna give you a link to 3 documents, and each of those documents, 2 documents, each of those documents are gonna align with the last 2 steps in our process. So again, if you remember our list, one of the items on our list was monitoring and tracking progress. And the last item on our list was evaluation and revision. So monitoring and tracking progress, it's gonna be participatory. We're gonna focus on whether or not we're achieving our goals. We're gonna look at lessons learned. Sometimes we don't look at lessons learned, but we should. We're gonna look at data, and we're also gonna look at success. Can you all see this whole document in your screen, or do we need to make it a little smaller? Okay. So this is our monitoring, and a little smaller. Okay, thank you. So this is our, in terms of monitoring and tracking the progress. So we just went through creating goals, writing action steps, identifying our outcomes, doing a SWOT analysis, and now we're going to develop a process or a way to monitor and track that. DW was describing for us with communities and schools, it sounded like in her description that they have a way of revisiting their strategic plan on an ongoing basis so that they can monitor and track and keep up with how things are going. I say keep it simple, keep it really, really simple. The strategic plan should be shared at every board meeting. You should be getting a report out on how you're doing. The strategic plan should be shared at every staff meeting, or as many as possible, so that everybody knows how we're progressing and keeping up with that. The individuals that you identify who are responsible for achieving or not achieving, but who are responsible for a particular action step, you want to be checking in with those folks. Executive directors, you're gonna wanna be a part of determining how the strategic plan is monitored and tracked, because you're gonna be responsible for that. So that's important for us to understand. And then the very last thing in this process is evaluate the plan and then revise it if you need to. Oftentimes, Leslie, you can move up one. Oftentimes, when we review the plan, if it's a 3-year plan, typically it's an annual review. You know, so if it's multiple years, you typically do it annually. But technically, you're doing it ongoing. I mean, it's an ongoing thing. So you're constantly tweaking it if you need to, not in terms of overall content, but you might have to change, let's say, an action step. You know, maybe there's a resource you can't access, or you can't complete that action step that way. So that's important to keep in mind. You're doing presentations about the plan, you know, when you evaluate it and revise it. The strategic planning committee can also be a part of this. You're doing a report out. If you're going to evaluate and revise the plan, when are you going to do it? What is that timeline going to be? So in terms of thinking about that. So Leslie, if you would take me back to the PowerPoint and back to that list. So again, this is where we started. Start up, preparing the plan, needs assessment, asset mapping, review your mission, review the vision, write goals and objectives or action steps and outcomes, do a SWOT, write the plan, implement the plan, monitor and track it, and evaluate and revise it. So this is what we have covered today. I think any just kind of final, if we go back to the gallery view, any kind of final thoughts about what we have completed today? If you could just give us some general feedback. You're right, Kathy. Whew, yeah, you're exactly right. But we did it together, right? We did it together. So that's what counts. Absolutely, it does look linear, but it is not linear. You know, there are multiple moving parts. And you really want to, if you choose a consultant, if you choose a facilitator, you want to make sure that they are a good match for your organization and what it is that you're trying to do, because you're paying for that. And so you want to make sure you do that. And I think Rebecca shared some strategic planning resources that the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits has. It's been great training with you today. Hopefully, we did a lot of skill building, and get ready for next week. We got 2 topics.
Thanks, Dr. Palmer. I'm sure that Salima will be popping back on here to give us our closing. I did want to just pop the survey link in the chat for today's session. If you'd like to go ahead and complete that now, typically it's been included in the wraparound, and it will still be in the wraparound, but if you'd rather go ahead and click on that and do that right now while you're thinking of it, that would be great. If not, it'll be in that wraparound and we'll be good to go there.
Yes, before we conclude, I did want to take a moment. I see a few raised hands. Feel free to unmute yourselves with any closing questions that you might have before I share a couple of remarks. I see Adriana, Catherine. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I think in our breakouts, one of the breakout sessions, I had said that in some organizations, especially if you're maybe a longer running historical organization, I've noticed that if you do any major changes during strategic planning, it might be beneficial to think through having someone come in, maybe a consultant if you don't have to pay a lot for your other strategic planning, to do some change management consulting, because when you make any major revisions, that part can be really difficult to kind of wrap head around. Otherwise, your strategic planning you might plan and make some major revisions, and it might just kind of sit there because staff might have a hard time kind of wrapping their mind around any major changes that you're trying to make to the organization. So help with that part might be helpful.
Great, thank you so much for that feedback. I saw Catherine and Kennan's hand as well. So in that order.
Yeah, a quick question about SWOT analysis. I was just wondering if you could talk just a little bit more about why it comes at that part of the process. And do we do that for each goal statement, and kind of what the purpose of that is, whether that's to help us identify some action steps that could address threats that come up during the SWOT analysis in our goal statements, or is that supposed to be just generally, you know, looking at the whole organization? So yeah, just more about that. Thank you.
Dr. Palmer, if you could unmute. Okay.
I was just going on. Catherine, I was just going for it. But you can utilize the SWOT analysis as you see fit. You know, so you can use the SWOT analysis as I did. I use it to help us to think clearly about, if we wrote this goal, if we desire this goal rather, and we desire this outcome, what are these 4 elements? What's the reality over here? But you can also do a SWOT analysis for the nonprofit as a whole in terms of the whole organization. If you do it by goal, if you do it not really category, but if you do it by goal like that, you can compile that to help you tell the story for the entire nonprofit. And the last thing I'll say about that, you can tell I'm just a geek about this stuff. But the last thing I'll say about that is that remember when we did the needs assessment and asset mapping, we also did capacity assessment. So you have that information in the earlier steps that you can then come back and utilize that to help you to frame out that SWOT piece. Does that help?
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. And Kenan, I saw your hand raised. Just want to make sure.
Yeah, just a quick question for Dr. Palmer. We've chatted about this in our breakout group, but you know, in some communities, the nonprofit consultants can be few and far between. And you know, any words of advice about walking the fine line between having someone or consultant that knows enough about your organization so that they can help you adequately plan in your strategic planning process, but then also someone that doesn't know so much that they can't be objective or honest with you about the process?
That's a good question, Dr. Palmer. Yeah, I'm mute again.
I'm just going, okay.
I know, it's an exciting topic.
So what I would say to that is, if you select a consultant, if you're able, well, let me back up. I would say consult with the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. That would be one thing, because they can help you identify consultants all over the state, right? So they can help link you and connect you in that way. But I think that you just have to tell your consultant what you want. And when they're not providing what you want, tell them and help them to correct that, because they may be an awesome consultant, but if you don't tell them that they're not operating or functioning in that way where you need them to balance it, then they're not going to know. I mean, you just have to tell them. Keep in mind, you're their customer. And so just because they're the consultant, they don't come in and take over. You know, which is why you have now all this background, right? You have some skills around this, so you know what to ask for. So you just have to tell them, you know, if they're not able to do that, and get their commitment to do that up front.
That's helpful, Dr. Palmer. Thank you for sharing that. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I want to share just a couple of quick things before I conclude. We will share some additional resources in our upcoming newsletter on how to best select a consultant, not only for your strategic planning process, but for ongoing nonprofit management needs. And also, we're planning a webinar on that as well, too, in partnership with Nonprofitist. So stay tuned for that. I'll be happy to share that with you all. I wanted to also remind you, you might have received an email at some point this week inviting you to join our Center Connect community for the Institute. You all are a great group. You stay engaged in the chat. You have some really awesome breakouts and engagement, and we want you all to continue these conversations and dialogue amongst this cohort within this community. So I would strongly encourage you, if you have not received that email, please feel free to reach out to myself or Rebecca. We'll be happy to help you to navigate to how to get into that community. And we want you just to continue on the same way that you have in today's discussion. So thank you so much for that. I want to leave our final words with our President and CEO, Jean Tedrow, to close us out. Thank you, Jean.
Thank you, Salima. Wow. I don't know about the rest of you, but I've been listening in since this began and my head is spinning. And there is so much information here. Dr. Palmer, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for all the information. We appreciate all who have made this learning experience possible. The Triangle Funders Collaborative, Dr. Palmer, you have given us a boatload of information and worthy of follow-up and review, homework, etc. Dr. Bergen, I don't know if he's still on, but I want to say again, thank you to him and High Point University. Salima Thomas, for your leadership in moving this project forward, and for your team, Rebecca and Leslie. Thank you so much. I am so thrilled to be here with you all. And so the final thank you is to all of you for caring enough about the work that you do in your community that you are bound and determined to do it the right way, the best way. So thank you for caring so much about the nonprofit sector and the missions and purpose that you live every single day. Thank you. That's all I have to say, Salima. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean, for those remarks, and we appreciate all of you for joining us today. We thank you for the feedback that you're providing in the chat. Please continue offering feedback in the evaluation link that Rebecca shared with you. The more that you all inform our work, the better we can provide resources and content that meets your needs. So have a great remainder to your week. You'll certainly hear from us by the end of the week with some follow-up resources. Have a great day. Take care, everyone.